Chapter 6. True Knowledge and False Knowledge. As we saw in the previous chapter, true knowledge is not a state that we can newly attain, because it always exists as our own essential and fundamental consciousness I am, which we never for a moment cease to know. What prevents us from experiencing it as it really is only the false knowledge that we have superimposed upon it. What do we mean when we speak of false knowledge or wrong knowledge? Except our basic knowledge I am. Everything that we know is only a thought that arises in our mind, a form of knowledge that is inherently dualistic, involving as it does three seemingly distinct components: ourself as the knowing subject, something other than ourself as the object known, and linking these two a separate act of knowing. That is, when we feel I know such and such, this knowledge involves a knowing consciousness or subject called I, a known thing or object called such and such, and an action or process of doing called knowing. These three components constitute the basic triad of which every form of objective knowledge is composed. In this basic triad of objective knowledge, the verb know may be replaced by some other verb such as perceive, see, hear, taste, experience, think, feel, believe, or understand, but still this triad remains as the basic structure of every form of knowledge or experience other than our essential and fundamental knowledge, which is our knowledge of our own being, I am. Since our fundamental knowledge I am is non-dual, it does not involve any distinction between the consciousness that knows and itself that it knows, nor does it involve any separate act of knowing, because consciousness naturally knows itself simply by being itself and not by doing anything. Why do we say that all knowledge involving this triad is a false or wrong knowledge? Firstly, we say so because each component of this triad is a thought that we form in our mind by our power of imagination. Without our power of imagination, our power to form thoughts, we could not experience any knowledge other than I am. Thus, every knowledge other than I am is essentially imaginary. Even the idea that our knowledge of the external world is formed in our mind not only by our power of imagination, but also in response to actual external stimuli. It is a thought that we form in our mind by our power of imagination. No reason or proof exists that can justify our belief that any of our knowledge actually corresponds to something outside our mind. All we know and all we ever can know is known only within our mind. Even the seemingly external world that we know through our five senses exists for us only within our mind, just as the world we know in a dream exists only within our mind. Secondly, we say so because each component of this triad is a transitory experience. Though the knowing subject I is relatively constant in contrast to the objects known by it, and its actions of knowing them, which are thoughts that are constantly changing, rising and then subsiding in our mind, each one being replaced the next moment by another. Even this I, the subject who knows this constantly changing flow of thoughts, is transitory, rising only in waking and dream and subsiding in deep sleep. This subject who thinks and knows all other thoughts as our mind, our limited adjunct-bound consciousness that knows itself not merely as I am, but as I am this body. Since this subject, all the objects known by it, and all its successively repeated actions of knowing those objects, are thus merely transitory appearances. They cannot be real, because though they appear to be real at one time, they cease to appear real at another time. Their seeming reality is therefore just a false appearance, an illusory apparition formed in our mind by our power of imagination. Though all our knowledge other than I am is thus an imaginary and false appearance, how does it appear to us to be real? Whatever we know appears to us to be real while we are knowing it. Even the world that we experience and dream, and the body which we then take to be I, appear to us to be real so long as we are experiencing that dream. There is therefore something that makes all our current knowledge appear to be real. What is that something? Every knowledge we have seen consists of three components, the first and basic one being the knowing subject, I. This subject is a compound consciousness formed by the superimposition of an imaginary adjunct, this body, upon the real consciousness I am. Thus, underlying every knowledge is the true knowledge I am. And it is this true knowledge, or our consciousness, that gives us a seeming reality to every knowledge that we experience. How exactly is the reality of our basic knowledge I am thus seemingly transferred to all the other knowledge that we currently superimpose upon it, even though that other knowledge is false? All our other knowledge is known only by our mind, which is the knowing subject and which comes into existence only by imagining itself to be a body. Before imagining and knowing any other thing, our mind first imagines a body to be itself. That is, it confuses a body which is a product of its imagination with I am, which is its real and basic knowledge. Since I am is real, and since our mind mistakes that imaginary body to be I am, it cannot but feel that body to be real. Whether the body that it now imagines itself to be happens to be this body of the waking state or some other body in dream, our mind always feels that its current body is real. Since that current body is one among the many objects of the world that it is currently experiencing, our mind cannot but feel that all the other objects that it is currently experiencing are as real as the body that it now mistakes to be itself. In other words, since we mistake certain current products of our imagination to be ourself and therefore real, we cannot avoid mistaking all the other current products of our imagination to be equally real. However, though our basic knowledge or consciousness I am alone is real, and though all the other things that appear to be real borrow their seeming reality only from this consciousness, which is their underlying base and support, we are so accustomed to overlooking this consciousness and attending only to the objects or thoughts that we form in our mind by our power of imagination, that those objects and our act of knowing them appear in the distorted perspective of our mind to be more real than the fundamental consciousness that underlies them. The only reason why we suffer from this distorted perspective is that we are so enthralled by our experience of duality or otherness, believing that we can obtain real happiness only from things other than ourself, that throughout our states of mental activity, which we call waking and dream, we spend all our time attending only to such other things, and we consequently ignore or overlook our underlying consciousness I am. This distorted perspective of our mind is what makes it so difficult for us to accept that our consciousness I am alone is real, and that everything else is just an imagination or apparition. Whereas in our distorted perspective, all our knowledge of this world appears to be solid, substantial, obvious, and irrefutable, our underlying consciousness I am appears in comparison to be something insubstantial, ethereal, something that we cannot quite know with the same degree of precision and certainty. A clear example of the effect that this distorted perspective has upon our human intellect is the famous observation made by Descartes, cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. What he implied by this conclusion is that because we think, we know that we are. But this is putting the cart before the horse. We do not need to think in order to know that we are. First we know I am, and then only is it possible for us to think or to know I am thinking. More appropriately, therefore, his saying could be inverted as I am, therefore I think, or better still as I am, therefore I seem to think. Even when we do not think, as in deep sleep, we know I am. Our thinking depends upon our knowledge of our being, our fundamental consciousness I am. But our knowledge of our being does not depend upon our thinking. However, what Descartes observed is not altogether untrue. Whatever we know and whatever we think does indeed prove that we do exist. All our knowledge and all our thoughts are irrefutable, clear proof of our existence or being. However, to know that we exist, we do not need any such external proof because our existence or being I am is self-evident. Even in the absence of any other knowledge or thought, we know that we are. In sleep, for example, we do not think or know any other thing, but we do experience that state and we remember our experience of it now, in this waking state, saying, I slept. We experience the thought-free state of sleep because in that state, we do indeed exist and know that we are existing. Therefore, our existence and our knowledge that we do exist do not need any proof, least of all the proof provided by our thinking and knowing other things. Our existence or being is self-evident because it is self-conscious. That is, our being is conscious of itself, and hence it does not need the aid of anything else to know itself. In other words, we are self-conscious being, and hence without the aid of anything else we know ourselves as I am, simply by being ourself. Therefore, our basic self-consciousness I am does not depend upon any other knowledge, but all our other knowledge does depend upon our basic self-consciousness I am. Hence, our basic self-consciousness I am is our one fundamental and essential knowledge. In order to think, we must be, but in order to be, we do not need to think. And since our being is not separate from or other than our knowledge of our being, we can equally say that in order to think, we must know that we are. But in order to know that we are, we do not need to think. Since we always know I am, even when we know it mixed with other knowledge or thoughts, why should we say that such other knowledge obscures our knowledge of I am, preventing us from knowing it as it really is? The true and essential nature of our consciousness I am is mere being, because it is able to be without knowing any other thing, as we experience each day in deep sleep. Merely by being itself, it knows itself. Hence, its being is itself the consciousness of its being. Thus it is perfectly non-dual knowledge, a knowledge in which that which is known is that which knows it, a knowledge that involves no action, a knowledge that involves nothing but mere being. On the other hand, all other knowledge involves not only being but also an act of knowing in addition to a distinction between the knower and the known. This imaginary act of knowing is superimposed upon the reality of our mere being, making it appear to us that the nature of our consciousness I am is not merely to be, but is to know things other than itself. Thus, by the transitory rising of any other knowledge, the real and permanent nature of our true knowledge or consciousness I am, which is mere being, is obscured. Instead of knowing merely I am, we know I am knowing this or I am knowing that. Since all knowledge other than I am is imaginary and therefore unreal, the knowledge I am knowing this is merely a false or wrong knowledge, a knowledge in which an imaginary adjunct has been superimposed upon our basic and only true knowledge I am, thus obscuring it by making it appear otherwise than it really is. In order for us to know our true self as it really is it therefore sufficient for us merely to cease knowing anything else? If we merely cease attending to any other thing, do we thereby automatically attain true knowledge of our real self, I am? No, we do not, because in deep sleep we cease attending to or knowing anything other than ourself. But even then we do not have a clear knowledge of what we really are. If in deep sleep we knew ourselves truly and clearly as we really are, we could not again mistake ourselves to be something else, a physical body. In waking and dream, though all knowledge of other things is removed in deep sleep, our consciousness I am is nevertheless still obscured by seeming darkness or lack of clarity of self-knowledge. What is this darkness or lack of clarity that we experience in deep sleep, and that prevents us from clearly knowing the true nature of ourself, our real adjunct-free consciousness I am? In Advaita Vedanta, our power of delusion or self-deception by which we seemingly prevent ourselves from knowing our true nature is called Maya. The word Maya etymologically means what Ya is not, Ma, and is defined as the power that makes that which is unreal appear to be real, and that which is real appear to be unreal. This power of Maya or self-deception functions in two forms, as the power of veiling or obscuring called Avarana Shakti, and the power of scattering, dispersion, diffusion, or dissipation called Vikshepa Shakti. The former, Avarana Shakti, which is our power of self-forgetfulness, self-ignorance, or lack of clarity of self-knowledge, is the root and primal form of Maya, because it is the original cause that always underlies the latter, Vikshepa Shakti, which is our power of imagination that enables us to project from within ourselves a seemingly external world of multiplicity, whereas Vikshepa Shakti functions only in waking and in dream. The underlying Avarana Shakti functions not only in waking and dream, but also in deep sleep. Our power of self-forgetfulness, which is our power of veiling or Avarana Shakti, can be compared to the background darkness in a cinema, without which no picture could be projected on the screen. All the thoughts that we form in our mind, including the seemingly external world that we project and perceive through our five senses, are like the pictures projected and seen on the cinema screen. The power that projects this picture of thoughts and a seemingly external world is our power of imagination, which is our power of diffusion or Vikshepa Shakti. Just as the cinema projector could not project any picture if its indispensable light were not shining brightly within it, so our mind could not project the imaginary picture of this or any other world if its indispensable light were not shining brightly within. This indispensable light that shines brightly within our mind, enabling it to project its imaginary picture of thoughts and objects, is our essential consciousness I am. The states of waking and dream can be compared to the state in which a film reel is rolling in the projector, producing an ever-changing picture on the screen, whereas sleep can be compared to the state in which one film reel is finished and another is about to be threaded into the projector. All the while, however, the bright light in the projector is shining. So in the gap between the removal of one reel and the fitting of the next, all that is seen on the screen is a light. However, though at that time we can see no pictures on the screen, but only a frame of light, the background darkness of the cinema still remains. Similarly, in deep sleep, though we do not experience any effects of Vikshepa Shakti, but only the essential light of consciousness I am, the veiling power of self-forgetfulness or avarana Shakti still remains, preventing us from knowing our consciousness I am as it really is, free from any adjuncts such as a seeming lack of clarity. Our power of self-delusion or Maya can never entirely conceal our real self, because our real self is the consciousness that enables us to know the effects of our self-delusion. All our self-delusion or Maya can do is to obscure our real self by making it appear to be something other than what it really is. We always know I am, whether our mind is functioning as in waking and dream, or in temporary abeyance as in sleep, but we do not know it as it really is. In all these three states we know that we are, but we do not know what we are. In waking and in dream we know I am this body, a person named so-and-so, and I am conscious of this world around me. In deep sleep, on the other hand, we know ourselves as being seemingly unconscious. Thus, in waking and dream, our identification with the physical body and our consequent perception of a world around us is superimposed upon our fundamental consciousness I am. Similarly, in sleep, our identification with the seeming unconsciousness of that state is superimposed upon our fundamental consciousness I am. That is, in all three of these states, the true nature of our real self, our fundamental and essential consciousness I am, is obscured by the superimposition of illusory adjuncts. As we have seen earlier, our present so-called waking state is essentially no different to the many dream states that we experience while asleep. Out of our sleep of self-forgetfulness, we create both waking and dream. Since we create both of these states only by our power of imagination, they are both merely imaginary states that do not exist in reality. Though from our point of view in this present waking state, we may be able to point out certain differences between our experience in waking and our experience in dreams. These differences are only superficial differences in the quality of each of these states and not differences in their essential substance. Because our attachment to our body in this waking state is normally stronger than our attachment to our body in a dream, this waking state appears to us, at least now, while we are experiencing it, to be more solid, fixed, consistent, and lasting than an ordinary dream. However, merely because from our present point of view in this waking state there appear to be such differences between the quality of our experience in this state and the quality of our experience in dream, we cannot conclude that this waking state is actually any more real than a dream. Both waking and dream are states that we experience only within our own mind. All that we experience or know in either of these two states is only a series of thoughts that we have formed within our mind by our power of imagination. In both these states, we imagine a body, which we mistake to be ourself, and further imagine that through the five senses of that body, we perceive an external world, which we mistake to be real. However, these bodies that we mistake to be I, and these worlds that we mistake to be real, are all merely images that we form and experience within our own mind. So long as we mistake ourselves to be this mind, this consciousness that has limited itself by mistaking an imaginary body to be itself, We cannot know anything outside the limits of this mind. In both our waking and dream states, we live our whole life only within our mind. Since all that we know, other than our fundamental consciousness I am, is known by us only within our mind, we have no valid reason to believe that any world or anything else other than I am actually exists outside the confines of our mind. We consequently have no valid reason to believe that our present waking state is anything but another dream created entirely by our own self-deceiving power of imagination. Under what circumstances or in what condition can a dream be experienced? A dream can occur only when there is an underlying sleep. When we are wide awake to the world around us and to ourselves as a particular body in that world, we cannot mistake another body to be I or another world to be real. Only after we have fallen asleep, forgetting our normal waking self, this imaginary body that we now mistake to be ourself, and the fact that we are supposedly lying in our bed, can we mistake ourselves to be some other imaginary body that is undergoing various experiences in some other imaginary world. Therefore, if our present waking state is only another dream, as we have good reason to suppose it is, there must be some sleep underlying it. What is that sleep that underlies this waking state? The sleep without which this waking state could not occur. The difference between waking and sleep is that in waking, we imagine ourselves to be a particular body, whereas in sleep, we forget this imaginary body-bound self of the waking state. Sleep is thus essentially a state of self-forgetfulness. In our ordinary everyday sleep, we forget our normal waking self, and because we have forgotten this waking self, this particular body that we now imagine to be ourself, we are able to imagine ourselves to be some other body in dream. Though our waking self is supposedly lying in sleep, supposedly lying asleep on a bed, unaware of the world around it, we forget about this waking self and instead create another imaginary self for ourselves in the dream state, identifying another body as I and seeing another world around us. Therefore, just as the sleep that underlies an ordinary dream is a state of forgetfulness of our waking self, so the sleep that underlies this dream that we call our present waking state must be a state of forgetfulness of our real self. However, what do we actually mean when we define sleep as a state of self-forgetfulness? In what way do we forget ourselves in sleep? Even in sleep, we never actually forget that we are, but only forget what we are. Because in sleep we know that we are, but not what we are. In dream we are able to mistake ourselves to be some other body. If we had not forgotten our waking self in sleep, we could not imagine that other body to be ourself in dream. Similarly, if we had not forgotten the true nature of our real self, which always exists as our adjunct-free consciousness I am, we would not be able to imagine ourselves to be anything other than that. That is, we would not be able to imagine ourselves to be one body in the waking state, to be another body in dream, and to be unconscious in sleep. Thus, the fundamental sleep that underlies all our dreams, including the present dream that we now mistake to be our waking state, is our sleep of self-forgetfulness, the sleep in which we have forgotten our real self, the true nature of our essential consciousness I am. Though in our present waking state, we mistake the seeming unconsciousness that we experienced in sleep to be merely an unconsciousness of our body and the world. In sleep, we did not actually know or think, I am unconscious of my body and the world. Only in waking and dream do we think, in sleep I was unconscious of my body and the world. That which thinks thus is our mind. But since our mind was not present in sleep, it cannot accurately tell us what our experience in sleep actually was. All we can now say about sleep is that though we knew I am in that state, it nevertheless appears to us now to be a state of seeming darkness, ignorance, or lack of clarity. That seeming lack of clarity is the unconsciousness that we appear to have experienced in sleep. But what actually is that seeming lack of clarity? About what is it that we seem to have lacked clarity in sleep? Since no body or world existed in sleep, to say that we were unconscious of them is misleading. Saying that in sleep we were unconscious of our body and this world is like saying that in our present waking state we are unconscious of the body and the world that appeared to exist in a dream. Since any body or world that we experience, whether in waking or in dream, is only an imagination, a collection of thoughts or mental images that appears only in our own mind. Saying that we were unconscious of them in sleep is in effect saying that we were unconscious of our thoughts in sleep. We could say that we are unconscious of our thoughts in sleep only if we actually had any thoughts in that state. When we say that we are unconscious of something, it implies that that thing actually exists, or at least appears to exist. Since in sleep we only experienced our own essential self-conscious being I am, we have no reason to believe that anything other than that actually existed in that state. Therefore, the clarity of knowledge that we seem to have lacked in sleep can only be a clarity concerning what actually existed in that state, namely, our own real self-conscious being. In other words, the unconsciousness that we now imagine that we experienced in sleep is only our seeming lack of clear self-knowledge, our seeming lack of clarity concerning the real nature of our essential consciousness I am. In sleep, we know that we are, yet we seem to lack a clear knowledge of what we are. Therefore, the seeming darkness of sleep, which in our present waking state we mistake to be merely an unconsciousness of the body and world that we are now experiencing, is actually just our lack of clarity of true self-knowledge, our so-called forgetfulness or ignorance of our own real self. If our real self, which is our essential consciousness I am, were not seemingly obscured by the veil of our self-forgetfulness or self-ignorance, sleep would be a state of perfectly clear self-knowledge. In deep sleep, therefore, the adjunct that we superimpose upon our real self and that thereby prevents us from clearly knowing its true nature is only this veil of self-forgetfulness called avarana. Though this veil of self-forgetfulness can never prevent us from knowing I am, it makes us experience I am in a distorted form, thereby enabling us in waking and dream to imagine that we are a physical body, and that through the five senses of this body, we are seeing a world of multiple objects and people. Because this veil of self-forgetfulness is the original cause of the illusory appearance of our mind, the compound consciousness that imagines I am this body in Advaita Vedanta, it is described as our causal body, or karana shahira, just as the self-forgetfulness that we experience in sleep is our causal body. So our mind, which arises out of this causal body, is our subtle body, or sukshma sharira, as explained by Sri Ramana in the 4th paragraph of Nanyar. In verse 24 of Uladu Narpadu, both of which we cited in Chapter 3, and the physical body that our mind creates for itself by its power of imagination in waking and dream, is our gross body, or sthula sharira. That is to say, our physical body is a gross form of our mind, which in turn is a more subtle but nevertheless gross form of our self-forgetfulness. Whenever our mind rises, whether in waking or in dream, it does so by imagining itself to be a physical body, but when it subsides in sleep, all its imaginations cease, and hence it merges back into its causal form, which is our veil of seeming self-forgetfulness. Our forgetfulness of our real self is thus the primeval sleep that underlies the appearance of both our waking and our dream states. Is this primeval sleep of self-forgetfulness, which thus causes the appearance of both waking and dream, a state distinct from the ordinary deep sleep that we experience every day, or are they both the same state? Though we can experience a dream within a dream, as we sometimes do, when we think we have woken up from a dream, but later wake up again and find that our first waking was only from one dream into another, we cannot experience a sleep within a sleep. Since dream is a state of duality and diversity, we can experience any number of dreams. But since sleep is a state devoid of differences or duality, there can only be one state of sleep. That one and only state of sleep is our fundamental sleep of self-forgetfulness, the sleep that has come about due to our seeming lack of clear self-knowledge. This sleep of self-forgetfulness is the underlying cause for the rising of all other states, the original cause for the appearance of all duality, all our countless states of dream, including our present dream, which, while we experience it, we imagine to be a waking state, arise only from this underlying sleep of self-forgetfulness. Therefore, the state of deep sleep that we experience every day is nothing other than this original sleep of self-forgetfulness that underlies the rising of both waking and dream. Though waking and dream are both temporary states that occur in our long sleep of self-forgetfulness, we wrongly perceive sleep as being a short gap that occurs each day in our waking life. In truth, however, our present waking life is merely one of the many dreams that occur in our long sleep of self-forgetfulness. Even now, we are experiencing that sleep of self-forgetfulness. But within this sleep, we are also experiencing a dream that we call our present waking life. The state of deep sleep that we experience every day is merely the state in which all our dreams have subsided, leaving only in their underlying and causal state our sleep of self-forgetfulness. How do we forget our real self? In truth, we always know our real self, and we have never forgotten it. We only appear to have forgotten it. We can never really forget it, because we are the essential consciousness I am, and the very nature of this consciousness I am is to be conscious of itself. However, though our real consciousness I am can never forget itself, we nevertheless somehow appear to mistake ourselves to be our mind, which is a spurious and unreal consciousness that does not know its own real nature, and that thereby imagines, I am this body. Therefore, to account for the appearance of this mind, we have to posit a seeming forgetfulness of our real self. However, this self-forgetfulness of ours exists only in the view of our mind, and not in the view of our original consciousness I am. Our self-forgetfulness, therefore, is not real, but is merely an imagination, an illusory appearance that exists only in the view of our unreal mind. Our self-forgetfulness, as we have seen, is the primal form of Maya or self-delusion. And Maya is Ya-Ma, that which is not. Our self-forgetfulness, or lack of clear self-knowledge, therefore, is something that does not really exist. Whereas our self-forgetfulness, which is our power of self-obscuration called avarana, is the primary form of Maya, our mind, which is our power of imagination or self-diffusion called vikshepa, is the secondary form of Maya. All forms of Maya, including not only its two basic forms of self-forgetfulness and self-diffusion, but also the duality or multiplicity that arises from these two basic forms, are known only by our mind and not by our original consciousness I am, whose nature is to know only its own being. Being known only by our mind, therefore our self-forgetfulness and all that arises from it is only an imagination. That is, though our power of imagination arises only from our self-forgetfulness, our self-forgetfulness is nevertheless a mere imagination. Our self-forgetfulness is in fact the primal form or seed of our power of imagination or mind, and as such it is itself that which appears to us as our mind. Our mind or power of imagination is therefore merely a gross form of our extremely subtle self-forgetfulness. Such is the inexplicable and illusory nature of Maya, that though our self-forgetfulness is the original cause that created the spurious and unreal consciousness we call our mind, it nevertheless does not exist, except in the view of this unreal consciousness that it has created. How then does this illusory self-forgetfulness arise? How do we appear to have forgotten our real self? Since we are, in reality, only our fundamental self-consciousness I am, which can never forget its own true nature, how can we even seemingly forget ourselves? Since we are in truth the unlimited consciousness I am, which alone is real, we alone truly exist. Since nothing exists other than ourself, there is nothing that can limit our freedom or our power in any way. Being the one and only absolute reality, therefore, we are perfectly free, and hence all-powerful. Or to be more precise, we ourselves are perfect freedom and absolute power, because freedom and power cannot be other than the only existing non-dual reality, which is our real self. Therefore, other than ourself, there is no power that could make us forget our real self, or even seemingly forget it. Hence, it must be only by our own freedom of choice that we have seemingly forgotten our real self. Because we ourselves are perfect freedom. We are free to be whatever we choose to be, and to do whatever we choose to do. We are free either to be our real self, that is, to remain just as we ever really are, as mere being, which is our own infinite, non-dual self-consciousness I am, or to imagine ourselves to be a finite, body-bound consciousness that experiences an imaginary world of duality. In order to imagine ourselves to be a limited, body-bound consciousness, we must first choose to overlook or ignore our real nature as the unlimited, adjunct-free consciousness I am, or at least to imagine that we have overlooked it. This imaginary overlooking or ignoring of our real self is what we call self-forgetfulness, and it occurs only by our own choice, by our own misuse of our unlimited freedom and power. Though it is only by our own unlimited freedom and power that we thus imagine that we have forgotten our real self, once we have imagined thus, we have thereby seemingly become a limited body-bound consciousness, and hence we no longer experience our unlimited freedom and power, but instead feel ourselves to be a finite creature possessing only very limited freedom and power. Because of our imaginary and self-imposed limitations, it is no longer possible for us to be whatever we choose to be, and to do whatever we choose to do. Our freedom of choice, therefore, is now limited. However, even now, we have the freedom either to attend to the thoughts or objects that we have created by our power of imagination, or to attend to our own essential consciousness in order to discover our real nature, who or what we really are. Only by such self-scrutiny can we remove the veil of self-forgetfulness with which we have seemingly concealed our true nature. When we, as the absolute reality, seemingly choose to misuse our unlimited freedom and power to forget our real self, and thereby to imagine ourselves to be a finite individual, our power assumes the unreal form of Maya. But when instead we choose to use our unlimited freedom and power correctly, to be merely as we really are, our power remains in its natural and real form, which in the language of mysticism or religion is called the power of grace. Grace and Maya are thus one and the same power, the only power that really exists. When we misuse our power to delude ourselves, we call it Maya. And when we use it correctly to remain as we are, we call it grace. Maya is the power of delusion or self-deception, while grace is the power of enlightenment or clear self-knowledge. Therefore, if we want to free ourselves from Maya, we must turn our attention away from all other things towards our own essential consciousness I am, in order to know what we really are. When we do so, our own natural power of grace, which is the clarity of our essential self-consciousness, which ever shines peacefully in the core of our being as our own real self I am, will draw our attention towards itself by its overwhelming power of attraction, and will thereby dissolve the delusion of our self-forgetfulness within itself, which is the perfect clarity of true self-knowledge. As we have seen, our self-obscuring and self-deceiving veil of self-forgetfulness is the sleep that underlies all the dreams that we ever experience, including our present dream, which we mistake to be a state of waking. This sleep of self-forgetfulness is what enables us to imagine that we are a limited person who feels a particular body to be I, and who perceives a world of multiple objects through the five senses of that body. The primal form of Maya that first enables us to forget ourselves is our power of self-obscuration called Avarana Shakti, while the secondary form of Maya that then enables us to imagine a multitude of thoughts and objects that are seemingly other than ourself is our power of self-dissipation called Vikshepa Shakti. In waking and dream, we experience the effects of both of these two forms of Maya, but in sleep, we only experience the effect of the primal form of Maya, the power of self-forgetfulness called Avarana Shakti. Therefore, in order to free ourselves from the power of Maya, and thereby know our real self, we must not only set aside the false knowledge of multiplicity created by its Vikshepa Shakti, but must also pierce through the veil of self-forgetfulness cast by its Avarana Shakti. That is why in verse 16 of Upadesa Undiyar, which we have discussed earlier, Sri Ramana does not merely say, our mind giving up knowing external objects is true knowledge, but instead says, our mind, knowing its own form of light, having given up knowing external objects, alone is true knowledge. Without giving up attending to external objects, we cannot turn our attention inwards to focus it wholly and exclusively upon our form of light, which is our true self-consciousness I am. But by merely giving up attending to external objects, we do not automatically focus our attention on our true consciousness I am. Therefore, Sri Ramana places having given up knowing external objects as a subordinate clause and places our mind knowing its own form of light as the subject of the sentence. True knowledge is not merely a state in which we have given up knowing any external objects, but is the state in which we clearly know our own true self. In sleep, we give up knowing external objects, but we do not thereby attain true knowledge. In order to attain true knowledge, it is not sufficient for us merely to remove all our other forms of false knowledge. That is, our knowledge of multiplicity, duality, or otherness. Because mere removal of such false knowledge will not destroy its root and foundation, which is our forgetfulness of our own real self. Removing our other forms of false knowledge without putting an end to our self-forgetfulness, which is our primal form of false knowledge, will result only in a temporary subsidence or abeyance of our mind. From such a state of abeyance, our mind will rise again, and when it rises, all our false knowledge of duality will rise again with it. Our mind can rise and be active only by experiencing the false knowledge of otherness. That is, only by knowing duality. Because as a separate individual consciousness, its very nature is to know things that appear to be other than itself. However, even without knowing any duality, it can still continue seemingly to exist in a dormant seed form as it does every day in deep sleep. The seed form in which it seemingly remains in sleep and other such states of abeyance is its causal body, which is its basic self-forgetfulness or lack of clarity of self-knowledge. Therefore, to attain true knowledge, it is necessary for us not merely to make our mind subside temporarily in a state of abeyance, but instead to destroy it forever by putting an end to its original cause and supporting base, which is our forgetfulness or ignorance of our real self. When we finally put an end to our self-forgetfulness by knowing our real self as it is, we will discover that our mind was merely an apparition or illusory superimposition that never really existed, just as like the illusory snake that our imagination superimposed upon a rope. The state in which we thus discover our mind is truly ever non-existent is described in Advaita Vedanta as the state of mind annihilation, or Mano nasa, and is the state that in both Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta is called nirvana, a word that means extinction, extinguished, or blown out. Being an illusory apparition, our mind can only be destroyed or annihilated by our recognizing that it truly does not exist, which we can do only by knowing our real self. Just as we can kill the illusory snake that we imagine to see lying on the ground, only by recognizing that it is merely a rope and not a snake, so we can kill the illusory mind that we now imagine ourselves to be, only by recognizing that it is merely our real self, our own unlimited, adjunct-free consciousness I am. That is, when we know what we really are, we will discover that we were never the mind that we imagined ourselves to be, and that that mind was merely a product of our power of imagination, an insubstantial shadow that appeared in the darkness of our ignorance or forgetfulness of our own real self. Every day, in deep sleep, we remove all our false knowledge of duality, but because sleep is only a state of temporary abeyance of our mind, such false knowledge arises again as soon as our mind rises from sleep. However, instead of making our mind subside temporarily in a state of mere abeyance such as sleep, if we destroy it by putting an end to our self-forgetfulness, it will never rise again, and hence all our false knowledge will be destroyed forever. As Sri Ramana says in verse 13 of Upadesa Undiyar, subsidence of our mind is of two kinds: laya, abeyance, and nasa, annihilation. That mind which is an abeyance will rise, but if its form dies, it will not rise. By certain forms of meditation or yogic practices, such as breathing control, it is possible for us to remove all our false knowledge of duality artificially, and thereby to make our mind subside temporarily in a state of abeyance, sometimes even for a prolonged period of time. But the only means by which we can destroy our mind is by knowing our real self, and we can know our real self only by scrutinizing our essential consciousness I am. Therefore, in verse 14 of Upadesa Undiyar, Sri Ramana says, when we send our mind, which subsides only temporarily, when we restrain our breath on the path of knowing our real self, its form will die. The words that Sri Ramana uses in this verse to mean the one path of knowing are avashi, which can be taken to mean either oru vashi, the one path, the unique path, or the special path, or orum vashi, the path of knowing, the path of investigating, the path of examining, or the path of consideringly attentively. Because examining and knowing our real self, our essential consciousness I am, is the unique and only means by which we can put an end to our self-forgetfulness, which is the cause and foundation for the illusory appearance of our mind and all its false knowledge. Sri Ramana deliberately chose to use these words or vasi here, knowing that they would thus give this double meaning. When our mind subsides temporarily in sleep, or in any other similar state of abeyance brought about by some artificial means, why do we not thereby attain true knowledge? Since all our false knowledge of otherness is removed in sleep, what prevents us from knowing the real nature of ourself in that state? The only answer we can give is to say that our self-forgetfulness persists in sleep, and it does so because we have not put an end to it by knowing our real self as it is. However, if we do not know anything other than I am in sleep, why do we not know it as it is? What exactly do we know in deep sleep? Now, in the waking state, when we mistake ourselves to be our mind, we cannot say exactly what we experienced in deep sleep, because we, as our mind, did not exist at that time. That is, our waking mind cannot accurately tell what we experienced in deep sleep because it did not exist in that state. We, however, did exist in sleep, and we knew that we existed at that time, because we now clearly know that we did sleep and that we did not know anything other than ourself at that time. We have a definite memory of having slept, even though we are unable to remember exactly what we experienced in deep sleep. Since we wake up from sleep and again mistake ourselves to be this body, we obviously did not experience a clear knowledge of our true self in that state. But though it is clear to us, at least from our present perspective, as a waking mind, that sleep is not a state of perfect knowledge, we still do not know exactly what we experienced in sleep that prevented us from clearly knowing our true self. From the viewpoint of our present waking mind, we can vaguely recognize that we did experience our consciousness I am in sleep, but we cannot say exactly in what form we experienced it. To our present waking mind, sleep appears to be a state in which we were enveloped by a confused cloud of seeming ignorance or lack of clarity of self-consciousness, just as in waking, we are now enveloped by our confused identification of ourself with this particular body. And in dream, we were enveloped by our confused identification of ourself with some other body. But though we do not know exactly what we experienced in deep sleep, other than the fact that we did experience I am, can we at least find a reason for our lack of clarity of self-consciousness in that state? That reason must be the same fundamental reason why we also lack clarity of self-consciousness in this present waking state and in the state of dream. Whatever may be the fundamental reason why we do not clearly know ourselves in sleep, since that same fundamental reason is the underlying cause of our lack of clear knowledge, not only in sleep but also in waking and in dream, all we need do is to find and do away with that cause now in our present waking state. If we can clearly know our real self now, that will destroy the inexplicable self-forgetfulness that underlies not only waking, but also dream and deep sleep. In our present waking state, we do not know what we really are, because we spend all our time attending only to things other than ourselves, and never turn our attention to focus it wholly and exclusively upon our fundamental consciousness I am. As a result of our thus not attending exclusively to our consciousness I am, we confuse ourselves by imagining ourselves to be something else. Because we thus confuse ourselves by mistaking ourselves to be our body and mind in the waking state, and because our body and mind are absent in sleep, we continue to confuse ourselves in that state by mistaking ourselves to be in some way unaware of our real nature. However, since our mind is absent in sleep, we cannot in that state make any effort to focus our attention keenly upon our essential self-consciousness I am. We can make such an effort only now in this waking state or in dream. In dream, however, if we try to turn our attention towards our essential consciousness I am, we usually find that we awaken immediately from that dream into our present waking state. Because our attachment to the body that we mistake to be ourself in dream is not as strong as our attachment to this body that we now mistake to be ourself in this waking state, our attachment to that dream body is easily dissolved by our making even a little effort to attend to ourselves. However, if our self-attention in dream thus results only in our remembering our waking self, it is clearly not a very keen or deep self-attention, since our illusory imagination that we are a body in dream is so easily dissolved by even a superficial self-attention. It is difficult for us to attend to ourselves deeply and keenly in dream. Therefore, it is only in the present waking state that we can seriously make an effort to attend to ourselves deeply. That is, to attend wholly and exclusively to our essential self-consciousness I am. In dream, if we cease to know any objects, but do so without actually knowing our waking self, we will slip either into deep sleep or into another dream. Similarly, in this waking state, which is also a dream, if instead of trying to know our real self, we merely try to give up knowing any of the objects or thoughts that we are experiencing, we will slip either into deep sleep or into another state of dream. Therefore, in order to go beyond these three ordinary states of waking, dream, and deep sleep, we must not only cease knowing other things, but must also remove our veil of self-forgetfulness by remembering our true self. That is, in order to awaken to our true self, we must turn our attention selfward, to scrutinize and clearly know the true nature of ourself, our mere consciousness of being I am. Though we know our essential consciousness I am in all our three normal states of waking, dream, and deep sleep, we know it in a different form in each of these states. In waking, we know it in the form of this body. In dream, we know it in the form of some other body. And in deep sleep, we know it in the form of a seeming unconsciousness. Since the form in which we know our consciousness I am in each one of these states does not exist in the other two states, each of these forms is merely an illusory adjunct that we superimpose upon it. Therefore, none of the forms in which we know it in any of these three states can be its true form. If we clearly knew our consciousness I am in its true form in any one of these three states, we could not mistake it to be anything other than that in the other two states. Therefore, since we experience ourselves in a different form in each of these three states, and since we pass through each of these states repeatedly one after another, it is clear that we do not know the true form of our essential consciousness I am in any of them. However, since we are this consciousness I am, and since the very nature of this consciousness I am is to be conscious of itself, it must be possible for us to know this I am in its true form. In fact, the very deepest level of our being, which is our absolutely pure and non-dual self-consciousness, I am. We must even now know it clearly in its true form. Therefore, beyond our ordinary three states, which are all states of wrong knowledge, there must exist a state of true knowledge in which we always clearly know the real nature of our essential consciousness, I am. Though this state of true knowledge, the state in which we are fully awake to the absolute reality of our own self, transcends all our ordinary three states, it nevertheless underlies them at all times, including this present moment. Therefore, in order to experience this fundamental state of true knowledge, all we need do is to scrutinize and know our essential consciousness I am at this precise moment. Since this state of true knowledge transcends our ordinary three states, it must be devoid of all the false knowledge, all the imaginary knowledge of differences or duality that we only experience in two of them. Therefore, since it is a state in which we experience no duality, it is a thought-free state like sleep, but since it is at the same time a state in which we experience absolute clarity of self-knowledge, it is also a state of perfect wakefulness. Hence, in Advaita Vedanta, this fundamental state of true self-knowledge is sometimes described as the state of wakeful sleep or waking sleep, Jagrat Sushupti in Sanskrit, or Nanavu Tulyil in Tamil. Since this state of wakeful sleep is beyond our three ordinary states of waking, dream, and deep sleep, in Advaita Vedanta it is also sometimes referred to as the fourth state, or Turiya Avashta. Somewhat confusingly, however, in some texts another term is used to describe it, namely the fourth transcending or Turiya-atita, which has given rise to the wrong notion that beyond the fourth state there is some further fifth state. In truth, however, the non-dual state of true self-knowledge is the ultimate and absolute state, beyond which no other state can exist. Since it is the absolute state that underlies yet transcends all relative states, true self-knowledge is in fact the only state that really exists. Therefore, in verse 32 of Uladu Narpadu Anubandham, Sri Ramana says, For those who experience waking, dream, and sleep, the real state of wakeful sleep, which is beyond these three ordinary states, is named Turiya, the fourth. However, since that Turiya alone exists, and since the three states that appear and disappear are in reality non-existent, the one real state that is thus named Turiya is, in fact, Turiya-atita, that which transcends even the relative concept that it is the fourth. Be clear about this truth. Our fundamental and natural state of wakeful sleep, or true non-dual self-knowledge, is described as the fourth only to impress upon us that it is a state that is beyond our three ordinary states of waking, dream, and sleep. However, when we actually go beyond our three ordinary states by experiencing our fundamental state of true self-knowledge, we discover that this fundamental state is the only real state, and that our three ordinary states are merely imaginary appearances which are seemingly superimposed upon it, but which in reality do not exist at all. Therefore, though it is sometimes called the fourth state, the state of true self-knowledge or wakeful sleep is in fact the only state that truly exists. Hence, since the term Turiya, or the fourth, implies the existence of three other states, it is actually not an appropriate name for the only state that truly exists. Therefore, though the true state of wakeful sleep is named Turiya, it could more appropriately be named Atita, that which transcends. In other words, since it is the one absolute reality and is therefore completely devoid of all relativity, it transcends not only the three relative states of waking, dream, and sleep, but also the equally relative concept that it is the fourth state. This is the reason why it is also described as Turiya-atita, a term that literally means that which transcends the fourth. The above verse was composed by Sri Ramana as a summary of the following teachings that he had given orally and that Sri Muruganar had recorded in verses 937 to 939 of Guru Vachaka Kovai. When all the states, waking, dream, and sleep, which are seen as three, disappear in sages who have destroyed ego, the self-conceited sense of being a separate individual, Turiya, the fourth, which is the exalted state, is that which predominates in them excessively as Atita, that which transcends all duality and diversity. Since the states, waking, dream, and sleep that huddle together enveloping us as the three components of our life, as an individual consciousness, are mere apparitions that appear and disappear in the non-dual Atita, the one all-transcending state which is the state of our real self, which is known as Turiya, the fourth, and which is pure being consciousness I am. Know that for those three illusory states, our real self is the adhisthana, the single base upon which they appear and disappear, and in which they must eventually merge and become one. If the other three states were fit to be described as real, only then would it be appropriate for us to say that wakeful sleep, which is the state of pure jnana, knowledge, is the fourth, would it not? Since in front of Turiya, the so-called fourth, those other three states huddle together, that is, they merge together and become one, being revealed to be unreal as three separate states. Know that that so-called fourth state is in fact Atita, the transcendent state, which is the only one real state. Whereas the reality of our fundamental state of true self-knowledge is absolute, the seeming reality of our three ordinary states is merely relative, relative only to our mind, which alone knows them. However, when we experience the absolute state of true, non-dual self-knowledge, we will discover that our mind was a mere apparition that never truly existed. Therefore, when the phantom appearance of our mind is thus dissolved, all our three relative states of waking, dream, and deep sleep, which are mere figments of our imagination, will dissolve along with it. After this dissolution of our mind, all that will remain is our natural state of wakeful sleep, the peaceful and non-dual state of absolute true knowledge. All forms of duality or relativity are experienced by us only in the waking and dream states, and not in their underlying state, the state of deep sleep from which they both arise. Since duality and relativity are known only by our mind, and since all things known by our mind are only thoughts that it forms within itself by its power of imagination, all forms of duality or relativity are mere imaginations, thoughts that we have ourselves created. Since our mind, which thus creates all duality and relativity, is itself a false form of knowledge, a spurious form of consciousness that arises only when we imagine ourselves to be a body, which is itself just one of our imaginations, all forms of duality or relativity cannot be anything other than false or wrong knowledge. Thus, since our mind is just a phantom that arises from the state of deep sleep, which is our sleep of self-forgetfulness, all the imaginary knowledge of duality or relativity that our mind experiences in waking and in dream arises likewise only from our sleep of self-forgetfulness. Therefore, since the non-dual state of true self-knowledge transcends not only the states of waking and dream, but also their underlying state of deep sleep, it is the supreme and absolute state that transcends not only all forms of wrong knowledge, but also the fundamental self-forgetfulness, which is the original cause of all wrong knowledge. Since this absolute state of true knowledge is our natural state of being, it always exists within us as our own real self or essential consciousness, and hence we can experience it only by knowing ourselves as we really are. Since we cannot know our real self unless we attend to it, the only means by which we can attain direct experience of true and absolute knowledge is to scrutinize keenly our innermost being or essence. Though this true knowledge, which is our real self or essential being, is the reality underlying all the three states that we are now accustomed to experiencing, we cannot make the necessary effort to attend to it while we are in sleep. And though we are able to make this effort in dream, whenever we attempt to do so, our dream is usually dissolved instantly, because, as we discussed earlier, most of our dreams are fragile states based upon a feeble sense of attachment to our dream body and to the world that we experience through that body. Hence, in practice, it is generally possible for us to succeed in our effort to know our real self only now, in this waking state. Therefore, in verse 16 of Upadesa Tanipakal, Sri Ramana says, in the waking state of sleep, the true state of wakeful sleep or clear self-knowledge will naturally result by your subtle investigation or minute examination, which is the practice of constantly scrutinizing yourself. Until such sleep shines suffusing and absorbing your entire attention both in waking and in dream, incessantly perform or practice that subtle investigation. The reason why Sri Ramana says here that we should continue the practice of subtle self-investigation until the state of wakeful sleep is experienced throughout both waking and dream, is that he composed this verse as a summary of verses 957 and 958 of Guru Vachaka Kovai, in which Sri Muruganar had recorded what he once said to a spiritual aspirant who complained that he was unable to experience the perfect clarity of self-consciousness or wakeful sleep and dream. Do not be disheartened, losing your mental fortitude by thinking that wakeful sleep does not yet suffuse and absorb your entire attention in your dream states. If the firmness of such sleep is achieved in the present state of waking, the suffusion of such sleep will also be experienced in dream. Until the state of such sleep is experienced in waking, do not abandon your subtle investigation, which is the practice of scrutinizing your essential self. Therefore, until such wakeful sleep shines, suffusing your entire attention in dream, performing that subtle scrutinizing investigation is imperative. Waking and dream are both states in which we experience the appearance of otherness or multiplicity. The wakeful sleep that we seek to attain is a state devoid of all such otherness, but is nevertheless a state of perfectly clear self-consciousness. Therefore, so long as we experience either otherness or a lack of perfectly clear self-consciousness, we are still caught in the illusion of the three states: waking, dream, and deep sleep. Hence, we should persist in our practice of subtle self-investigation until we experience a perfect clarity of pure self-consciousness, devoid of even the slightest trace of otherness, duality, or multiplicity. Whatever knowledge we may obtain about anything other than ourself is indirect, and therefore open to doubt. The only knowledge that is direct is the knowledge or consciousness that we have of ourself as I am, and hence it alone can be certain and free of all doubt. Before we know anything else, we first know our own existence as I am. This knowledge or consciousness of ourself is our primary and essential form of knowledge. Without knowing I am, we could not know anything else. A consciousness I am can stand alone without any other knowledge, as we experience daily in deep sleep, but no other knowledge can stand without this consciousness I am. Whenever this single, undivided, and non-dual consciousness I am appears to know other things in addition to itself, it does so by seemingly limiting itself as a separate individual consciousness that identifies itself with the body, one among the many objects that it then seems to know. This individual consciousness, which thus feels I am this body, a separate person, living in this world of manifold objects, is not our primary and essential form of knowledge, but only a secondary form of knowledge, a distorted form of our original and primary knowledge I am. All objective knowledge is known only by this secondary form of knowledge, the separate individual consciousness that we call our mind. Therefore, objective knowledge is not the primary form of knowledge, nor even the secondary form of knowledge, but only a tertiary form of knowledge. This tertiary form of knowledge depends for its seeming existence upon the secondary form of knowledge that we call our mind, which in turn depends for its seeming existence upon the primary form of knowledge, our fundamental and essential consciousness I am. Unlike other forms of knowledge, this primary form of knowledge I am does not depend upon any other thing, and hence it is the only knowledge that is absolute and unconditional. All other knowledge is merely relative. Since the secondary form of knowledge or mind can appear as a separate entity only by knowing the tertiary form of knowledge, the objective thoughts that it forms within itself, each of these two forms of knowledge exist relative only to the other.